Across the world, people have their housing costs taken away as much as half of their income. Have you ever thought of trying to change that? The good news is there is a way. House hacking is real, and we are here to show you how other people just like you have made it happen. Welcome to the House Hacking Podcast. And here is your host, house hacking expert, Andrew Kerr.
All right, we are back with another small multifamily house hacking episode today. But before we get to it, I just want to again say thank you so much for everyone that's been tuning in. If you do us a favor and leave a quick review and make sure to hit the subscribe button, we really appreciate it. And then if you have any very specific house hacking questions you need answered, shoot us a direct message on Facebook or Instagram at the House Hacking Podcast. And what we'll do is we'll get your questions answered back to you. Now, let's go ahead and get into today's episode. All right, Steven, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm excited to hear your story. I mean, how are you doing today?
Hey, pretty good. Just getting over a little bit of the cold and flu, but I'm here. I'm here and ready.
Well, I appreciate you pushing through and doing the call for us. Where are you actually calling in? I know you're somewhere in the States, but where actually are you?
Yeah, I'm down in Miami, Florida. So sunshine and humidity, probably.
Yeah, well, I'm over in New Orleans, so we've got a ton of heat and humidity. So I definitely understand what you're talking about there. You know, I know a little bit of background about your house hacking story, but maybe a great place to start off with is just, can you give us this high level summary of your house hacking experience?
Yeah. So I was actually living in Chicago back in right around 2011. I had just gotten married and we were living in this small 1-bedroom. Well, it was actually 2-bedroom, if you call it that, apartment. And we were looking for a place in the Chicago area, kind of visited every single neighborhood in Chicago and ended up buying a house. And it was a multi-unit. It ended up being a 2-flat that we turned into really a 3-flat. And we lived on the top floor, rented the first floor, and turned the basement into a garden apartment. And we owned that house from 2012 to 2018. It was a big part of our life, a big part of kind of figuring out who we are in our marriage, in our lives, and, in our careers even. And it brought me to where we are today, which is actually in Miami, Florida. We ended up transitioning, selling the house in 2018 for a profit and moving down to Florida. And that's kind of, the high level quick summary with definitely some details in between there. But that's where we are today.
Cool. Well, thanks for that. And let's actually dig into those details. So you're 2011, you're in Chicago, you just got married, and what was the process here? Were you specifically wanting to do a house hack? Had you heard about it? Or was it you and your wife were newlyweds, let's go on with our life? The big next step is to buy a house together. Like, what was the rationale? Were you both on board? What were you actually thinking at that time?
Yeah, so it was pretty crazy. So there was a lot of moving parts at that time. So I was in Chicago at the time, and my soon-to-be wife was actually in Miami. So I was looking at different places for us to live, but we wanted to buy a house, but we didn't really have enough time to do it. So we were looking at everything from single-family homes to multi-units to duplexes to, a little bit of everything, and kind of didn't have enough time is what it came down to in 2011, we were moving up. So we made the kind of split maybe a couple week decision to rent a place for that year. But we knew that we wanted to buy a house together. And kind of throughout that year, we ended up looking at places throughout the year, but with a realtor. But really it came down to our research and finding out what worked for us. And our price range, we really felt like the smart decision was to live in one part of the house and rent out the other. And we were both okay with it. And it involved a lot of research and a lot of different, I'll say we visited a lot of different places in Chicago, just to put it nicely. Our realtor, honestly, I feel like that man is a saint. Because we saw all sorts of Chicago, and it's not the smallest city in the world. It's not like you're checking out some little place in Wisconsin or anything. But yeah, so we ended up going with, with the house hack in Chicago.
So did you actually know what you were doing was a house hack at the time, or was it more of, hey, we think buying a small multifamily is just a good financial decision?
Yeah, it ended up being more of, we thought it was a good financial decision because we were looking at places that were, at first we were looking at places near Chicago that were closer to the suburbs, and the prices were, they're kind of expensive, and we didn't think we were getting a lot of value for our money. And then we look at some of these same places that were multi-units. Say, like, let's say the house was $300,000. We would then find a multi-unit for $300,000 or $350,000, and we're like, wait a minute. So we're going to pay almost the same amount, and we're also going to get rent from someone. So it just made a lot of financial sense to us.
So was it your wife's idea first, or your idea to start looking at the multifamily?
So it was mine. I'm a little bit of the personal finance nerd of the couples, of course. Being on the podcast makes sense. But she is kind of I say she's the smarter, more beautiful one. So when she heard about this, she essentially was on board almost immediately and said, okay, now that we start to understand some of the, what to look for, let's dive into this even more. And, now we also, because we wanted it to be an investment, but we also wanted it to be a place for us to live, which can be tough, especially when you're essentially going to have someone, in our case, living right next door to you or in the same building as you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm working on my fourth house hack right now. When my wife and I got married, we actually did a house hack together, and that's my third house hack and her first one. And I mean, it was just a world of difference looking at those two different things. Like, I'd owned dozens of properties at this point, and this was my wife's first ever property. So, there's this like dichotomy of like, I'm like long-term investment. She's like, I'm going to make a home for us. And, the one thing that cracked me up, I specifically remember we walked into the tile store. I go to the $1 to $2 square foot section. I turn around and I can't find her. And all of a sudden she's looking at the like $20 a square foot marble. And she's like, oh, this looks really pretty. I really like this one. And it was just this rub where we each had to figure out like, okay, what do you want? What do I want? Let's realize this is an investment. So I completely understand where you're trying to find like investment, but it still needs to be a home for us.
Yeah. And that's, that's really was a challenge throughout the entire house hack too, kind of with that mindset. You have to remember that part of it is your home and part of it is an investment as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So you started looking single family, then you leaned towards multifamily. How long did it actually take you to find it from when you started looking at houses to when you actually closed? How long was that process of you running your realtor ragged of looking at everything and all the different suburbs?
Yeah, no, technically, so it was before we got married. So that would have been like early 2011, and it probably took a little bit over a year to actually and I can't give like the exact 17 months 3 days or anything, but yeah, it was a little bit over a year. I would say 12 to 15 months at least. We ended up closing on the house in June. That's wrong. August of 2012.
Okay, yeah, I think it's really an interesting point, the fact that you took, this 12, 15 month period, right after the financial crisis in 08, 09, it was a lot easier to find real estate deals. And I know when I talk with folks now, they simply say, oh, there's no good deals out there. And I say, well, you just got to look. Like, I just closed on my fourth house hack. I'm still buying rental property, but you have to look at 3, 4, 5, 10 times as many deals to find the one. And I think that's really encouraging that you said, yeah, it just took us, well over a year to find the right situation for our thought process to involve. So anyone that's listening, if you've been looking for 2 or 3 months, don't get discouraged. Here's a great example of someone that it took them a year to find the right piece of it.
Yeah. And that's not even to mention that's the house that we actually closed on. That's not the house the other houses that we actually bid on and lost multiple times.
Yeah.
Because at that time it ended up being a bidding war for a lot of houses, even at that time, where we would look at a house and say, okay, that's worth $200,000. The market says it's $200,000. And then someone would put in a bid for $220,000. And it wasn't for us.
Yeah.
And it happened multiple times.
Yeah, it's definitely tough at times, but I think the perseverance which you guys had, and then you end up getting this really cool property. So let's actually talk about that. So you found it, you closed there in August. What'd you actually buy it for?
Yeah, so we bought the house for, well, we put an interesting story about that. So we put in, I believe the asking price was like 189 or something like that.
Okay.
And we ended up, as I mentioned, we actually had lost multiple bids before. And we kind of had come to the point where we got fed up. Like we were going to win this one. Like it was like, I'm going to bid more. I'm going to win. Like what would be the amount that I would feel comfortable with where I wouldn't feel bad if I lost that property for that amount.
Yeah.
And we ended up bidding like 200 and I want to say it was like 210. So it was like well over asking. I felt like no one's going to bid this high. And they didn't. They accepted our bid, and it was like 210, 215. But what was interesting was like the day before or 2 days before that everything was going to finally be accepted, there was this huge rainstorm, and it ended up actually causing water to come through. So on the day that I went and looked at the property, rain had actually come through the roof.
Oh man!
So we ended up, yeah. So it was like a good thing, bad thing. The good thing was I took pictures, took a couple of videos, and I sent it to them. This is actually it was a Wells Fargo foreclosure. So this is one of those, submit your deal. They're not changing anything type of deals. And sent them all this, ended up getting a, rehab estimate, et cetera. And that ended up saving us, I believe it was like $15,000 to $20,000. And they ended up accepting that newer bid because of the water that had come through. And because it was the roof needed to either be repaired or replaced or what have you. And I think our final almost exact bid was right around $200,000.
Cool.
Is what we ended up closing on the house for. But we got a 203K FHA loan. So we ended up then including right around $50,000 in rehab into our mortgage. So it was right around $250,000.
So you're all in about $250,000, and then that walkthrough that you were doing, was that actually your final walkthrough before closing, or were you still in due diligence at that point?
I believe it was in due diligence because it was. I think I just kind of went in type of thing. It was like I want to take a look at everything, make sure everything is right, because it wasn't anything official. Honestly, it was just like blessing, lucky, whatever term you want to use. It saved us $20,000.
Yeah, problem for them and a discount for you, so it works out well. All right, so you're all in on this property about $250,000. Do you remember roughly what you actually had to put down as a down payment for that?
Yeah, so the FHA, I believe we put down 3.5%, and not doing the math, but so what, $7,000 to $10,000?
Yeah, and then do you remember the house obviously needed work because you did the 203K loan. Did that scare you or your wife off at all? I mean, I know sometimes folks walk into a property and there's like, oh my goodness, it just rained and it's leaking and the property's, needs a new kitchen or a new bathroom. That immediately turns some folks off. Like, did you guys just stumble across it and you're like, hey, we see some potential here? Or did you have to convince your wife, or did your wife have to convince you?
No, we kind of looked at it as it would be an advantage because we could then take what was there and make it our own. And then we could also take some of the things that just needed some upgrades or what have you and improve the property as well. So we looked at it as, kind of big picture. Like we're going to take this, we're going to put that quote unquote sweat equity into it and make it better. And for us, it worked out really well. We're not, we're not very handy per se. We're not Mr. Fix-It. I've swung a hammer before, but I'm not anyone who's going to rehab a toilet or a bathroom or a kitchen or anything. So it was, for us, I think it worked out really well.
Cool. All right. So you bought it, you closed on it. How long did it actually take you to get all the work done?
Yeah. So we closed and I actually have to switch my timeline. And I used August. It was actually, because I remember it was like one of the hottest days in Chicago and that's when you move in and all that good stuff. But, it was June 30th. We actually ended up moving in July 1st. Our first renter was in as of October 1st. So July, August, September, So it took 3 months to get everything all, as much as possible. I'm sure there are some loose ends, but enough for someone to move in and feel comfortable with.
And so you were actually living there while the work was being done.
We were, yeah.
Oh, fun. That can sometimes be challenging. How'd that actually work out with the relationship? Here you are, newlyweds, just bought a multifamily, you're getting a mortgage payment for the first time, and there's work going on.
Yeah, lots of multitasking. That was part of it. But I think we handled it quite well because we felt like our place was kind of as long as we could get everything done with our place right away or the first floor right away to get someone rented in there, we felt like we were good. So there wasn't anything that I didn't think that we couldn't handle.
All right, so you had bought it, you had closed on it. It took you about 3 months to do the work. Now, you mentioned it was a 2-flat, but you were trying to change it into a 3-flat. So were you actually able to use that $50,000 or so that was included in the loan to convert it to a 3-flat, or did you have to sort of do all the work and then come back and sort of divide it up after the loan?
Yeah, so we ended up taking care of the first floor and our floor and pretty much anything that was on the outside of the building, because we ended up actually tearing down the garage that was there, which was the craziest thing. Wells Fargo came in and they did their kind of upkeep where they painted everything and they actually redid the roof on the garage, but the garage was ready to fall apart. I'll never understand that. We had to tear down the entire garage. So they wasted whatever money they put into it, I guess. But in terms of the basement, we did wait a little bit, and we didn't do that through our 203K loan. So what we ended up doing is Chicago is, I would say, they don't have, you'll see a lot of units that are considered mother-in-law or in-law suites that aren't quote unquote legal. They kind of say as is when they're selling them.
Yep.
And that was the way ours was. We ended up going through and we ended up having a family member come to Chicago and help us out with just some flooring and putting up some of the walls and finishing everything off just so it was, had the exits and the windows and all that good stuff. But yeah, we ended up doing that later on, not as soon as that October. I believe we ended up going into the following year and ended up renting it out that one, I believe, in April.
Okay. All right. So it's basically you're living on the first floor and you had this basement that you could also use. And then it was the upper floor, that second floor is where you put the tenant in around the October timeframe.
Well, switching that around. So we were on the top floor, the second floor.
And the tenant was on the first floor. And then you had that basement. Okay. So do you remember roughly what your mortgage was at that time?
Yeah. So with including escrow, and it varied throughout our time that we were there because of lovely Chicago taxes.
Yeah.
But it was anywhere from $1,800 to $2,100.
Okay. And then, for that year or so when you moved to Chicago and you rented, do you remember what you were paying in rent?
Yeah. So we were paying right around $1,200, not including any utilities.
Okay. So $1,200 for the apartment. And now here you are sort of right from the get-go, your mortgage was around $1,800. Then over the years, it stepped up a little bit as taxes increased. So you're in the house, you got that first tenant. How big was that? Was that a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom? And then what was the makeup of your unit as well?
Yeah, so everything was pretty close to identical, but we actually ended up giving the first floor, which I thought was the nicer unit, and we kind of agreed. We ended up giving that to tenant. I say giving it to him. That's what we ended up renting out. And it was a 3-bedroom, 1-bath. And our unit up top was 2-bedroom, 1-bath. But then instead of where the bedroom would have been, we actually had a dining room area.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of smart, though, when you're thinking about it, of we're a newlywed couple. Do we really need a full 3 bedrooms? And a 3-bedroom will get more rent than the 2-bedroom. So I think what you actually did, whether it was intentional or not, was the right and smart decision where living the 2. So what were you getting in rent from that 3-bedroom?
We started out as it was going to be rent, and then they would also be responsible for utilities separate. So at that time, we thought everything was fine. But because this was an old house, a very old Chicago house, I believe it was built in 1913. So old brick building. What ended up happening is we ended up including the utilities in there because we had one gas line also being connected to
multiple units. And then was the water, was it one water meter for the whole building?
Yep.
And then what about electric? Did you have 2 meters or was it 1 meter for the whole building as well?
That actually was 3. The electricity was 3, but the gas was 2. So what we ended up doing is saying, okay, everything's all included. So that kind of varied, and that's the reason I bring that up. But we didn't know that originally. We thought everything was completely separate.
I feel like you're about to get a giant gas bill that you weren't quite expecting, or a really high utility bill.
Yeah, something like that. Our first floor tenant was like, "Hey, this seems really high." I'm like, you know what? It sure does. So we ended up fixing everything, but I believe it was right in I think we started out at, it was like 1,100 actually it was 1,200 for the first floor. And then with utilities, it ended up bumping up a little bit more. I think at that time we were adding anywhere from $150 to $200. So it was probably all in right around 30.
So basically you get the utility bill and you go back and say like, hey, it was $200, you owe 100 and we'll pay the other 100.
Yeah, we ended up prorating it. We tried to keep it as we took last year's, I believe we took last year's gas or what have you. We asked the gas company and said, hey, what was it for last year? What was the electricity? And then we ended up prorating it through the whole year. And then we just kind of said, hey, we'll figure it out moving forward.
Okay, cool. So you were paying $1,200 in rent for your apartment, and now you moved in this place and you got an $1,800 mortgage and you're collecting $1,200 in rent, not counting utilities, maybe bringing you up to $1,300. So, I mean, literally this is like $600 a month to live in this 2-flat, soon to be a 3-flat place. So you're sort of in Chicago, a generally higher cost of living area. I mean, you just basically cut your housing costs in half just from apartment to the 2-flat scenario.
Yeah, and we were, the proud owners of a multi-unit family home in Chicago. So we were pretty pumped about it. A big learning curve, or I shouldn't even say big learning curve. It was a learning curve where you had to figure some stuff out, but it wasn't anything that we wouldn't have to figure out if we would have bought a single family home, is the way we looked at it.
Yeah, you would have had to figure out utilities and maintenance and stuff like that. Really, the only extra thing you added in was now a tenant. So you've got him in there, you're saving some money on your housing. All of those renovations were included in the loan. Now, was the original plan to renovate that basement into like a garden apartment, or was it this, as you're going on, you're like, oh, we've been here a couple months, the space isn't being used, let's convert this into another apartment?
Yeah, we were originally going to kind of take our sweet time and see how we liked being landlords and, the tenants and what have you. And then just an opportunity arose that we had family that was able to help us out with some tile work. And that was one of the big things that needed to be done. And he had some free time with, being able to help with walls and plastering, or with drywall, etc. And they said, hey, we can come up and help out. So we were like, well, let's just do it now. And it wasn't some insane amount of money that we had to, part with. So we figured the faster we can get it done, the faster we can get someone in there renting it as well.
Awesome. So you got that apartment. What was the makeup of that one? Was that a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom as well?
Yeah, so that was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath as well. And then really the way it worked is so that each floor was right around 1,300 square feet. But that one ended up being closer to 800, 850 because the remaining was it was like a laundry storage type area.
Okay. And then what were you getting in rent from that 2-bedroom?
That was 800.
Okay. So if I'm doing my math right, you're getting 1,200 and then 800, you're bringing in $2,000. Your mortgage initially was 1,800 and then moved up to the $2,000 range. So you're essentially living cost just went to zero.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Pretty crazy, right?
Yeah, that's really crazy. And living in Chicago. Yeah, I mean, that's just absolutely nuts. And then, at that point, you're hoping you're going to get appreciation. Your tenants are paying down your mortgage. So now you're getting growth in your equity just from that principal pay down. I mean, that's just that blows me away. That's an awesome thing that you're living in Chicago and have zero housing costs.
Yeah, not only was it, so I mean, it's a great opportunity where, getting our mortgage paid down, we have, people again, paying our mortgage at that time. And then also like we really were learning a ton of stuff. So you're figuring out, who should be living in your apartment or in your house. You're screening tenants, you're doing property management. because we handled everything. We're figuring out what we can fix, what we know how to fix, what we need to have someone else do, what, if we need to negotiate with that. So we ended up learning just a ton. And if, deciding if it was, the right moves, if it was an investment, it was an investment move, or we were doing this as a personal property. So it was just a ton of really like an opportunity, growth. And then, yes, the financials were really, it worked out.
So you mentioned you're managing this place by yourself. So let's actually talk about that for a little bit. So how'd you actually find your tenants, and what'd you do for screening?
Yeah. So when we started out, a lot of my research, the way we did it was I was in charge of Chicago.
Okay.
And what I ended up doing is, so a lot of my research came from, really, I'll say Google, but, anyone who had a bigger pockets would have been one. That was probably my main resource. And then, just personal finance websites, when something came up and I needed to learn a little bit more about it, I would throw it on Google and, check out the trusted websites. Yeah, exactly. But no, so I ended up doing all my finding my tenants through, at that time it was through Zillow.
Okay.
And then they had a package where it ended up being, I think it was 4 or 5 websites that they ended up kind of putting a, package together, but that was free of charge.
Yeah, you posted on Zillow, they disseminated it out to a couple different websites. That way you're getting a little bit of a broader reach.
Yep, exactly. And then I took that, and then for whatever reason, that didn't link specifically to Craigslist, but I believe they gave you like some sort of HTML that you could grab and put it in Craigslist. And that's exactly what I did. And most of our showings came from either, right directly from Zillow or Craigslist. And those were all free of charge. And, over time, I got better with it, of course, as tenants came through. But I ended up, kind of setting up for a one-stop shop. I said, okay, we're having an open house on Saturday from 10 to noon. Make it there. Let me write down your name and your number, and you'll be here from 10 to 10:15, even though we kind of had a slot open from 10 to noon. Of course, I didn't start out that way.
Yeah. I think we all started that way. It's like, oh, someone's interested. Let's go meet them right away. And then after a while, you're like, oh my God, people don't show up. Like, I'm doing all these random times. And I started doing the same thing once I realized it's like, I'm just going to batch everyone at a time, and I'll just hang out, bring a book to read. If someone doesn't show up, that's fine, because someone else is supposed to be coming right after them. I'm really glad you mentioned that, because for anyone that's listening, I think that's a huge time saver, is to try to batch people together, filter them a little bit, and then say, we'll do an open house. What I like to do is do like a Thursday from, 6 to 8, and then do like a Saturday morning. So, if people want to come in the evening, or if they work second shift, then they can come in that Saturday morning time slot. And that usually works out really well.
Yeah, I felt brilliant with the first time I did it.
Yeah.
Because the first time when I was doing it, initially, I was like you were saying, it was like, oh, someone's here at 5:45. Let me put down my dinner and run downstairs, which I had the luxury that I was in the same building at least.
Yeah.
But I still had to stop everything I was doing and, follow up. But in terms of once we ended up having a tenant, we had them go through a couple different processes. So I ended up initially, instead of having like a paper application, I believe it was a website. It was called rentalapplication.net. And I had them kind of fill out just basic general information. And again, that was free, but it was just to kind of get their information so I knew who they were.
Yeah.
And kind of had a general understanding, how much money they made, and if there was any like red flags that they were willing to kind of share to start out with.
Yep.
And then once we got people who were generally interested, we took that and then ended up using TransUnion SmartMove.
Oh yeah, use them for the credit and background check.
Exactly. And those were the ones that, I didn't want anyone to apply that didn't need to apply. Like I didn't want everyone spending $50 just to go through an application process.
Yeah.
I wanted to say, like, if I were in their shoes, I felt like this was the best way to do it.
Yeah, you want to be interested in them. You want to vet them a little bit before they go drop $50 on that application screening. And I'll actually link TransUnion SmartMove in the show notes for anyone that's listening. You can just go check out the episode, and we'll have it up there for you. Yeah,
and that's really, other than being, I guess, smart with our, decisions, screening everyone, asking the right questions, if there was, if there was contacts on there to follow up with the people to make sure. And really what it came down to is, how did you feel about that person? And were the numbers there? If they did, I believe I'm trying to remember, I believe the number we used was 40 times the rent.
4 times the rent?
Right. Well, now you got me double checking myself. In my head, it was their annual income was going to be 40 times.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you did
the rent.
Okay, great. Yeah. So sometimes folks will use a combination of, if the rent's $1,000, we want them to make $4,000 a month. But what you did is say, hey, if the rent's $1,000 a month, we want them to bring in at least, $40,000 a year to be able to cover that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Either of those routes work.
You had me worried. I was like, wait a minute, did I do the math wrong? And I
you
let
had
everyone
it right.
in accidentally.
But no, I mean, I think that's really good though, that you actually look at that income qualification, because it's not only like, okay, do they have good credit? No issues on the criminal background check. I like them. I think they'd be a good fit, but you want to make sure that they actually have enough income to cover that rent for you. All right. So you've got folks screened, you're getting tenants in. Did you do leases, or how'd you figure out what to do for leases?
Yeah, so we ended up using, the realtor that helped us get the house, he sent us over kind of the boilerplate Chicago lease, and we ended up signing 1-year leases with our tenants.
Okay. Yeah, that was smart. That luckily he gave you that boiler plate template that you could use, because I know I've talked with some folks and they've just like, oh, we'll do the room rental and they'll just pay me and that'll be it. And yeah, it's really important to have leases in place.
Contracts are important.
Yeah. Awesome. So then tenants are in, you've got real leases. How'd you actually go about collecting the rent? I know you live right there, but was it just, we'll walk down and pick up cash or a check, or did you do any sort of electronic transfer?
Yeah. So it started out with a check, just because, again, they walk up one flight of stairs and, stick it under the door. But over time, it grew into kind of make things easier. And we ended up using Cozy.
Oh, yeah. I use Cozy for when I do my house hacks. Yeah, I think, and I'll put Cozy in the show notes, a link to it, but it's a great tool that's free for property managers.
Yeah, it was amazing. And then I tend to do everything a little bit on my own, and I'm looking for stuff that's going to be either free or very, at a reduced rate, right? And this gave me the option to do everything that I needed to do and receive the payments for free. And if anything came up with the option of, if they were having issues with, say, a payment, they could also do it via credit card as well, if I remember right.
Yep.
So to have all those options available was important.
And the thing I like about Cozy is if a tenant wants to use a credit card, they pay the extra credit card fee. It doesn't take it out of our cut as the landlord, which I really, really like. And then, did Cozy actually have the maintenance portal set up when you were still using it? I know that was something they launched relatively recently.
I don't think so, because the only thing I used, I set up, like a showing or what have you, but I don't think I used anything beyond that.
Yeah, so recently they actually added this portal where the tenant can log in to pay their rent, but there's also a section now where they can log a maintenance request, and then I will get alert on my side, and I'll be like, oh, great. They're having an issue with the toilets running or a faucet's dripping. I'd call my contractor or the plumber, whoever it is, and then I could just right back through the portal say, hey, this contractor, here's his name. He'll be out there Wednesday or Thursday afternoon. And it's a really cool feature that they launched here recently to help track those maintenance requests as well.
Yeah, I've had nothing but positive things to say about Cozy. It was, again, it was free. And then if you had the option, if you wanted to get that money a little bit faster, I think it costs like $3 or something like that to.
Oh yes, speed up that transfer.
Yeah, and I never did, but I was always running the math in my head. Like, what if I got that money a little bit earlier? Would I pay my mortgage faster to save the extra whatever? Because I'm again, personal finance nerd, just thinking about that stuff. But
and for folks that are listening, what Steven's referring to is with Cozy, the tenant will pay rent, and then it usually takes 5 to 7 business days, give or take, to actually hit your account. So essentially, Cozy is drafting the tenant's account. It takes, a day to 3 days to clear, and then they initiate the transfer over to your account as the landlord or owner, and that usually can take another couple of days. So they basically have this option where you pay the couple bucks, and it cuts that sort of 5, 6, 7 days down to 2 or 3 days. But yeah, I've done the same thing. I'm like, oh, would it be nice to have the money faster? And I'm like, I'm not going to pay $3 to get my money like 2 days faster. I'll be fine. I'm not that hard up for the money. I don't want to pay a fee to have my money quicker.
Right.
Cool. So, here you are, you fixed it up. It's a 2-unit converted to a 3-unit. You have essentially zero housing costs. What are you doing with this extra money? Did you go out and party all the time? Fancy dinners, brand new cars, or did you save some money? I mean, how'd all that work out for you?
Oh man, I sold my fancy car a while ago. I don't need that. No, I would love to say that initially that our first thought was, hey, let's take this money and invest, or let's buy another property, or pay down debt, or like whatever the right things to say are. But no, we didn't right away, and I think we kind of wasted away that first, I would say, year. And I'd like to say that there's some magical place where that money went. I don't know.
I think we've all been there, where you're just like, where did my money go?
Yeah, and it might have went to fix up the house. It might have went to a vacation, like you name it. Like you said, where did that money go? But we did end up kind of taking a big turn, and we decided to have a plan with that money pretty shortly after, though. So we didn't spend it all the time. We ended up coming up. I said I was in charge of Chicago in terms of the properties. So when my wife and I got married, we decided that whatever you brought into the marriage, that's what you're responsible for. So She actually brought in a home in Florida. So she had a mortgage. Yeah. So she had a single family home that she was renting down in Florida since we had moved into Chicago. So we decided to take that money and any rent that we got from Chicago, in addition to, so we were actually we were tripling our payments. So there was the Chicago rent, there was the Florida rent, and then there was also just her regular payment that she was making to the Florida mortgage. So we were tripling down on our payment. So we took that and applied it to the Florida mortgage.
Oh, cool. And just tried to rapidly pay that down.
Exactly.
Oh, cool. Smart move. And then what was this turning point, though? Why'd you go from, great, we're using the money, it's just going out, not quite sure what it's doing, but, what was this turning point of we're now going to rapidly pay down the mortgage and actually take this money and the savings of having zero housing costs and do something positive financially with it?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it was just, my mindset of, I was in personal debt during pretty much all of this, and I was taking care of it, with my own money. We were actually keeping everything kind of separate but equal, where, the money that I made from my job was going towards paying off debt. So here I am paying off all this debt, and for us to kind of let that money just not go anywhere, it didn't make a lot of sense. And we really needed to make a shift. I was already doing good things with paying off debt. Let's do the next thing, and let's either invest or, pay down this property so this income becomes free and clear, essentially. Yeah. And that was really the big thing, was we're just kind of heading in that direction. It just took us, a couple steps to, get going a little faster, I guess.
Cool. So now, how'd the property wrap up? I know you mentioned earlier that you ended up selling it. What was the decision there, moving back to Florida? I know you said your wife was from Florida. Was that to move back to closer to her family, or how'd you end up selling the property?
Yeah, so we decided, one of the things so my wife is originally from Miami, originally from Nicaragua, and her family is down there. So she's Latin family, very close to them, calls them every day, that type of thing. Whereas, I'm calling my parents every Sunday, and I feel like I'm the best kid in the world.
Yeah.
So definitely different.
Different cultures for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And so we had always talked that, with this Florida plan, was once that mortgage is paid off, let's have an open discussion if, living in Chicago is right for us. And we ended up paying that property off at the end of 2016, just because of, again, we had all the extra mortgage payments, the rent from Chicago going towards that. And we said, hey, let's have a talk and let's see if it's the right thing. So during all of really 2017, we talked and started, saying, hey, if this happens or if that happens, because now we were down to one mortgage.
Yeah.
And in 2018, we kind of finally made the decision that said, okay, if we can go down to Florida, we're going to make it happen. It's one thing to have a mortgage or only one mortgage, but we also needed to make sure that, jobs were transferable. So we started that process to see, could we work remotely, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we had recently fixed up actually our unit. We kind of waited a little bit and fixed up our unit. So our unit was in pristine shape, at least in terms of, from when we bought it in 2012 to 2018. And so we just decided at that point that, we were able to move down to Florida, and it was a lot of pros and cons. It was really a coin flip. That's not what we did, of course, but, we said, hey, we can make profit and kind of lose some of the, day-to-day things that we needed to do with property management, et cetera, et cetera. And then we can take that money and really decide what's next. And we can have if we want to have a real estate property again down in Florida or somewhere else, or if we wanted to invest that in the stock market, we could take those next steps. And that's what we decided to do. We actually sold it right around July, August of 2018, and we moved down to Miami, Florida.
Cool. And are you now living in that house that's paid off, or did you get another place and you're still renting off that other paid off house down there?
We are actually living in the house that we paid off. It was a rental unit, and then just the way things worked out, funny enough, a pastor was actually staying in this property. He ended up getting a calling right around the same time that we were going to move down, and ended up having to leave or what have you, very close to when the lease was going to be up. So everything kind of worked out perfect. And we moved into our, former rental, now primary residence.
Well, that's pretty cool to go through this whole house hack experience, use that to help accelerate the pay down for the Florida home. And now you're living in a home with no mortgage. That's a pretty cool story.
Yeah, I'm glad everything worked out that way. I'd love to say that that's exactly how we planned it. But, to come down here to, down to Miami, down to a house that my wife originally bought before we ever even married, and have it be completely debt free, no mortgage, no debt in the family. It's I can really credit a lot of it to house hacking.
Yeah. All right. So if you're thinking back through that house hack experience, what do you feel your biggest win or biggest success was?
My biggest win, renting the place, having people pay me to live in my house.
That's definitely a good one.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was a lot of it too. I think if I would, just take out one thing though, is really just figuring out the ins and outs of being a landlord and a property manager. Because, it's not like yes, there's books out there, but it's not like, it's not taught in school per se.
Yeah.
It's not like, you took a high school course where they're like how to, handle a washer breaking.
It's very different from theory, reading about it, to the actual practical application of getting that call of hey, this broke, and trying to figure out contractors and all that fun stuff.
Yep.
All right. So, again, if you're sort of thinking back through that period, what do you think your biggest challenge was? Or is there anything over that sort of 6-year period, if you could go back and change it or do it differently, what might that be?
I would say one of the biggest challenges for us was it was an old home. I mentioned it before, Chicago, the home was built in I used to say, before the Cubs won the World Series, the last time the Cubs
that changed
World
recently.
Series, yeah, thank goodness. But yeah, so it was just an old house. So there was always going to be something that was, not perfect.
Yeah.
And what happens with any home, but when it's, when you're living in a home and you're trying to treat, for us, that second floor as our home, but then treat the rest of the property as well, like an investment, and really kind of keep that balance. So there was always really something that could have been, updated or fixed, and trying to figure out, what's the best use of our money. I would say that's something that I probably would, that was a challenge.
Yeah.
I don't know if we did it right or we did it wrong. But that's kind of how you figure things out.
Cool. And then would you ever do a house hack again?
It's another one of those,
Yeah.
I think I would. It would have to be the right situation.
Yep.
Again, a lot of it would probably come down to the value. Does it make a lot of sense? Because we've gone, essentially polar opposites right now. We went where we had someone right below us, and even below them there was someone, and now we have our own place. If I want to scream at the top of my lungs,
Yeah, you can do it. Yeah. Your wife might get mad at you, but now you don't have to worry about tenants getting upset.
Yeah, the tenants aren't saying, "Hey, I think something's wrong upstairs" or whatever. Not that you're ever really thinking about that too much, but it is a different scenario. So I think I would do it, but it would have to be the right situation.
Yeah, cool. Well, I really appreciate you being on the show. But before we let you go, what we like to do is ask all of our guests a set of final 6 questions that we like to call
the Famous 6.
So 6 rapid fire questions. You ready for them?
I'm ready. I will be very fast.
Awesome. All right. Number 1, what is your favorite personal finance blog or book or podcast?
I'm sorry, this is supposed to be quick. Favorite book, probably Richest Man in Babylon.
Oh, that and Rich Dad Poor Dad are like 2 of my classic, very old school books. I really love that one, and it's such an easy read. So if you haven't read it, go look it up. It's an easy book to read. All right, so moving on to number 2, what's your favorite real estate related blog, book, or podcast?
Yeah, I kind of grew up in a way on Bigger Pockets.
I think we all did.
Yeah, so it was a little bit, I was listening to them all the time, and I was also, diving into, Bigger Pockets in the forums and what have you. And now, I'll be honest, if I I kind of refer everyone now to Coach Carson.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's in South Carolina. I was at FinCon back in September and got to hear him talk and chat with him for a few minutes. Yeah, he's got a really cool story.
Yeah, and he's just a smart guy. And if he doesn't know something, he'll be honest. And he won't try to sales pitch you into giving some idea. He's just yeah, I'm not sure. But maybe talk to this guy, he might know, or what have you. So yeah, probably both of those.
Cool. All right, number 3, what's been your favorite travel destination so far?
I'm still going with Kauai, Hawaii, which is kind of like the smaller island of Hawaii. It's the quiet, the ones that go to bed at 9 p.m. because nothing's open.
Okay.
Which really fits who I am.
Yeah. Awesome. And then what's next on your travel or vacation list?
Oh man, right now it's taking a break. We actually just got back from Italy. I've been back from Italy
goodness.
for a total of, I think, 3 days.
So you're still battling jet lag at all?
Well, I think that's what brought me in the sickness. It was part sickness, part jet lag, and they just crashed into each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was actually in Italy for 5 weeks, so I'm ready to do nothing.
Yeah. I'm really
stay
jealous.
Where I'm at.
Italy's my favorite country. I've been 4 times, and then going back for the 5th time in June of 2020. So yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm a little jealous you spent 5 weeks there. I think the longest I've spent in Italy is 10 days, 2 weeks, and I always seem to add on other stuff, but awesome. And then number 5, what's your biggest bucket list item that you haven't accomplished?
Yeah, so I would say I actually want to own a professional sports franchise. Now, it doesn't have to be the Chicago Cubs or anything, because we're talking billions. But, I'd be happy with a little minor league team, or those in the Midwest, they have summer league baseball team.
Yep.
That would be crazy fun to own. So that's one thing I'm still, I need probably a little bit of time, but it's on the list.
Awesome. That's a pretty good bucket list item. I don't know. Have you ever followed Gary Vee?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, his big thing is he wants to buy the Jets. So now that's billions, but yeah, that's a cool bucket list item. And then number 6, do you have a favorite life hack?
Yeah, it's pretty old school, but I would say my life hack is to track everything and write everything down. So when I find I'm having the biggest success, whether it's weight loss, personal goals, eating, fitness, money, is when I'm really just tracking everything, when I'm writing it down, pen and paper. And, I can still put it in Excel, or I can still, write it online. But when I'm writing it down, it's, I see something. And to me, that's my biggest life hack, because a lot of people, they don't do that anymore. Everything's an app, or, it's on an alarm on their phone or something that tells them when to eat or something. Where I find that just writing things down is really, really effective for me. It's like a repeated process, making it ingrained up here in the mind, that is.
Well, what was that old saying? It's you can't measure what you don't track. And I'm a big believer in that too. And I think there's a big difference between putting something in an app versus like physically writing it down. I know I retain stuff so much better when you actually physically take the time to write it down.
100% agree.
Awesome. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for being on this show and sharing your story. It's such a cool story, what you did over those 6 years with your house hack in Chicago and how that helped set you up financially. I really appreciate you being on again. And for all the listeners, I'm going to put all of Stephen's contact info in the show notes. So if you want to reach out to him, we'll have his Facebook or social media posts on there as well.
Hey, Andrew, thanks again. I really appreciate it. Hope everyone listening to this story took a little something from it and can apply it to their situation.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the House Hacking Podcast. For more up-to-date information on house hacking, to access links and resources mentioned in today's show, and connect with the guest and host, head over to www.fibrei.com. That's www.fibrei.com, where your house hacking journey begins.